Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Sabrina Paganoni, and we're here for our weekly HEALEY ALS Platform Trial. I see that people are joining from the waiting room, so we'll give everyone a few seconds to join. And then if we can start going to the next slide. Tonight, to start, I'm really excited that we have a fantastic guest speaker, our own Allison Bulat, our platform trial patient navigator. She also has many other roles in ALS advocacy. And the reason we really wanted to give her some time to talk about her own experience is because we've been receiving many questions from patients about advocacy opportunities or opportunities for engagement with the research committee and this research community. And actually, Allison has done all of them and really is an expert and can tell us more about different opportunities for engagement for patients and caregivers with the research community. And so we can learn a lot from her experience and discuss ways that we can continue to synergize as a patient academia community. So
thanks, Sabrina. I feel so fortunate to be a part of these calls every week with you as part of the patient navigation team at the Healey Center. You know, as patient navigators, we spend a lot of time helping people in the community understand how clinical research works and answer questions about the regimens in the Healey trial and talk about things such as open label extension or expanded access protocols. And I love doing that, but I'm also very excited to talk a little bit today about another aspect of how to be involved in clinical research. Because as we know, unfortunately, not all people affected by ALS are able to be research participants in a clinical trial. However, there are actually so many other ways that people living with ALS and those who love and support them can be involved with the clinical research community. Next slide, please. So I want to start by saying that I totally get it that some things are easier said than done. And in fact, some things aren't even easily said. This gorgeous man on your screen right there is my late husband, Jeff. I lost Jeff to ALS in 2016 after over 20 years together. So you can see here our first wedding picture. Well, it's not our first wedding, I guess it is our wedding picture when we were kind of babies. And then our 10-year vow renewal in Hawaii. And we were planning our next vow renewal in Barcelona, Spain, but that never happened because ALS struck. And anyone who has ever experienced an ALS diagnosis knows what that moment feels like, right? It's like this odd feeling where if you turn around, the past that you knew is no longer there. Yet if you look forward, there's nothing but confusion and fear and uncertainty. So for me, the only option I could find was to make a pact with myself to always live only in the now. So next slide, please. So I find that it's true that sometimes the best views are seen during and after the hardest climbs. And every one of us touched by ALS has had a hard climb, right? We all have perspectives. We are truly more than just our diagnosis. We're people, right? We're people with families, with relationships, careers, mad skills in some ways. And I believe all of those things are so critical to moving research forward. So to that end, I began co-chairing the NEALS Patient Education and Advocacy Committee with Dr. Rick Bedlack in 2017 and have continued to grow that program that I want to take a moment to just share with all of you. Now, for those of you who may not know what NEALS is, it's the Northeast ALS Consortium. And I believe, Sabrina, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's the largest scientific research consortium in the field of ALS in the United States. So I'm going to go with, yes, that is. They're focused on the science of ALS and finding treatments and cures for the disease. So they're the scientific community. And they have many committees, one of them being the PEACE Committee, which is the Patient Education and Advocacy Committee. And that committee is responsible for the NEALS Clinical Research Learning Institute, or the CURLI, you might have heard it called, which owns the Research Ambassador Program. Now, this program is a 2-day intensive training course for people living with ALS and their loved ones, and it touches on all aspects of clinical research, such as the drug development process, the roles of all the players, such as the FDA, how ethics plays into clinical research and statistics, my personal fave, And at the end of the course, participants are considered to be certified NEALS research ambassadors and members of the Peace Committee. So what do our research ambassadors do? Well, thank you for asking, because I will tell you. They're involved in all kinds of advocacy and projects within the ALS community, from helping to review research protocols, to sitting on advisory boards at pharma companies, to giving feedback on websites, you name it. Our goal is to combine the people, the perspective they bring, the skills, and the opportunities all in one. Because as people touched by ALS, there's so many ways that we can live purposeful lives by contributing to the scientific research process and being part of the research community, whether or not we're research participants in clinical research. So good news, we do have an upcoming class planned in person in Florida in November. I encourage anyone who's interested to be a part of a group to go to the NEALS website to apply. It's www.neals.org. Excuse me, and there's a QR code there for you too. If you have any questions, or if you're looking for ways to be involved in the community, whether it's actually in clinical research or there's other things you're interested, I'm here and I'm always happy to chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison, and we always learn a lot from you. And I see a few questions for you already in the chat, and please feel free to send more. The first question I have for you before we give our weekly update, what are some of the positive changes that you have seen from advocacy?
Well, I think the most positive thing I've seen is that we all know that there's advocacy, because a few years ago, it was very unclear that there was no organized patient movements. And now we see each other all the time. We're such a large group of support system for each other. I think we're kind of like a family. So our individual advocacy has moved towards a group. And I think that's how we've been able to move the needle and start building relationships and close the gap between the patient community and the research community.
So you spoke about advisory panels. So what kind of time commitment is required to be on advisory panels?
So that varies actually by panel. That's a really good question. And we never want anybody to feel that they're overcommitted. So each time a company comes to us and asks for a patient group, we try to get as much information about what they're intending and what kinds of people they want and what that group will be doing, so that we can give you a feel. Some boards meet once a quarter, some boards meet once a month. It just really depends on the company and what's going on, what their goal is.
So you spoke about the NEALS Research Ambassador Program, but I know that there are many other patient organizations or groups that support other advocacy initiatives. Can you tell us more about a few? Obviously, there's so many that it's hard to list them all, but just a few to get started.
Yes, of course, there are so many, and the great thing is that we all work together. There's no conflict of interest in the advocacy world. So IMALS, of course, is a huge player in the advocacy field, and they have multiple committees and multiple opportunities to participate in just about anything of interest to you. The Les Turner Foundation, Everything ALS, there are so many different organizations. So I would suggest people kind of, instead of looking for the organization that you want to be a part of, think about how you want to participate, what skills, what perspective you're bringing, what you want to do, and then find where you can fit in based on who's doing that at that time.
So we had a few other caregivers. We also had some patients as guest speakers. So all these webinars are recorded. They also spoke a little bit about advocacy. I just wanted to ask you, if people want to get started and they're new to this, who should they contact? What's the next step?
Right. Well, they are, depending again on what you want to do, IMALS is a great place to start. There are so many support people there that can help you find your way. You're of course welcome to contact me if the clinical research side is something that you're interested in. I think if you were to do a search and look up any of the big ALS organizations, all of them now have patient advocates and patient navigators and different ways that you can contact anybody. We all talk. We talk amongst ourselves in these organizations. So we will definitely find you a spot to be regardless of where you start.
So I have a question and a comment or compliment about the Research Ambassador Program. So the compliment is that somebody is writing that they've been able to attend the Research Ambassador Program, and that's been incredibly helpful, and especially they really appreciate you, Allison, and your leadership and support. So that's great. So second that for sure. And then the question about the Research Ambassador Program is, what do research ambassadors do after finishing the training?
That's such a good question. And part of the training, the very last part of the training, is trying to figure out we work together to try to help find a way. We will meet with them. We will talk about what your goals are and help you find the right path to start. And you can do as much or as little as you'd like, but you'll always be aware of the opportunities by being part of the Peace Committee.
So a question about from someone who was just diagnosed with ALS, and I guess this is not exactly about advocacy, but it sort of ties in. So somebody is just diagnosed, is starting to get to know the community. Who should they contact, for example, to get into a trial, to learn more about research?
Well, at the HEALEY Center, of course, we are always open to helping anybody, especially as you're starting your journey, and we'll share our contact information, as well as NEALS.org also has clinical research, and they do have a concierge as well that can help you get started.
So sort of a similar question. So if somebody, let's say that somebody is not eligible for trials, but they want to look into expanded access, what's the best pathway to get expanded access?
Well, I think that is such an important question. I think the very first place to start is to start with your care provider and talk about what expanded access is and where it's available and how they can actually assist you. I think that's the first spot.
Great. So these were all the questions I've seen so far for Allison, but now let's get going with the weekly update. And then obviously, if you have more questions about advocacy or other things about what Allison spoke about, please write them in the chat. So as you know, we are committed to continuing to provide you with updates about the trial. Right now, we're testing 5 drugs. The first 4 are very close to final results, so we're very excited. I cannot commit to a specific date yet because we're really actively working and it's a massive amount of data. We're going to learn a lot about these drugs and about ALS as well, because we're collecting a number of biomarkers and other pieces of data that are going to be really important. So stay tuned, and we'll definitely keep you posted on this webinar in terms of when we can actually release the results. And then we're also enrolling for the 5th regimen, regimen E, or trialos. Next slide. And as requested by the patient community, we want to provide you with updates so that you know how many people have enrolled and how many spots there are. So far, we've had almost 100 people who have signed informed consent, and 65 have already been randomized within regimen E. As you may remember, after somebody signs informed consent, there is a screening period before somebody can actually start on study drugs. So thank you again for continuing to enroll in this study. While we're awaiting, obviously the results of the first 4 drugs, it's incredibly important to also continue the research on drug number 5, obviously, so that we can have more results in the new year. Next slide. And right now we are enrolling for regimen E, the 5th drug, at 39 sites. You can use the QR code and the link to find a center near you. And we're adding more sites. Next slide. And as always, and kind of that ties to the previous question about what's the best next step. Well, one great step is always to call the patient navigators. Allison, who is here with us tonight, as well as Catherine Small, who's not here tonight. But they're always available by phone or email. We also continue to provide you with the weekly webinars as well as the research newsletter. We're very excited to have Dr. Lori Chibney come back on July 28th, which is next week, as a special guest about biostatistics. We focus on the role of placebos. This is really motivated by your questions. As you know, Dr. Chibney, who is a statistician at the Harvard School of Public Health, already participated twice. So I encourage you to watch the previous webinars as a reminder of the topics that she has covered, and she will continue to build on the topic of biostatistics, the importance of trial design, placebos, etc. We will take a short break the first week of August because both Dr. Sukovic and I will be away, but we are working on more special guests to be announced for August. Next slide. And that was the last slide. So we have now time for questions. And again, actually I'm scrolling down. I have lots of compliments for Allison. So thank you so much. You're obviously well known in the advocacy community. Few questions about the trial itself. So how long is the screening period before starting the trial? Well, we have a max of 6 weeks, but really we try to do it as quickly as possible. So essentially the screening period means that we need to get some safety labs checked as well as some measurements. So it shouldn't be longer than 6 weeks, but we definitely the goal is to do it much faster. It all depends on when the labs come back mostly. And as you know, if you've been following us for a while, because of some supply chain logistical challenges, at times it takes a little bit longer to hear back from the lab, from the central lab, which is our vendor that's providing this service. However, again, I think the things are getting better. So hopefully, again, we'll be able to keep the screening period as short as possible. There's a specific question about the regimens that have been completed, the first 4. And the question is whether the database lock has been completed. No, it's not been completed yet. We're getting really close. Again, we are really working on the last few pieces of information. So the way it works is that you really cannot log the database until you have all the data from all the sites and they've all been monitored, cleaned. There's a whole quality control process that goes in, and that's very important because we want the data to be absolutely robust. And so again, that's why we are still working on the exact timelines, and that's always a moving target as sites give us, provide us with the data. But again, we're getting really close. So I see a question about when will participants know if they are on placebo or not. So that's a great question, and because, as you know, our trial has a placebo-controlled period that's as short as possible. It's 6 months, followed by a long-term open-label extension. The long-term open-label extension is a period of time of several months where people will receive active drug. And then we can compare the people who started active drug early compared to the people who started active drug 6 months later. And so as long as that's ongoing, we cannot tell people if they were on active or placebo before. That's per FDA guidance. And that's actually in a way, for a good reason, in the sense that the data from the open label extension studies, if they remain blinded, they can actually contribute to determining if the drug is safe and effective. So the data from the open label extension is not just a sort of an add-on, but it's really critical to the success of the study. And that's why we need to maintain the blind. So there's a question here. When does the OLE end? When does the open label extension ends? Well, that's a great question. Right now, they're written for them to continue at least until the time that we know the results. And again, it could be the results should be available over the next few weeks by the end of the summer for the first 4 regimens. And so until then, for sure, it's going to continue, but the protocol is written so that it can continue much longer. It will obviously depend on the results. So if the drug doesn't work, there's no point in continuing the open label extension, and at the time it will be stopped. If the drug does work, then we will continue it, and the exact duration and mechanisms, again, they will be worked out basically when we get there. But certainly there is the desire, the commitment to continue that, to keep people on drug. So there's a question, a very important question about why do people need to be able to swallow pills in the platform trial? And the question is motivated by very good observation. So right now, we are only enrolling for one regimen that's delivered intravenously, IV. So technically speaking, for that particular regimen, we don't have the need for people to swallow. However, there is still the criterion of being able to swallow. And that's because the backbone of the platform trial is the ability to share placebo data from across regimens. That's the only reason why we are able to lower the percentage of people that are on placebo to such a great extent. So that's basically the minimal level possible, but that's the only reason we can do that is because we're sharing data from other regimens, from other drugs. And so the only way to do it is to keep the population the same. In other words, we need to have the same criteria for all regimens or roughly the same. And because other drugs are actually given by mouth, that criterion has to stay, at least for now. I mean, obviously, if in the future all drugs are delivered a different way, that will be different, but for now, that's where we are. So there's a question about, whether, the question is from a patient with ALS, person living with ALS. And the person is asking if they should encourage family members or friends to be trained in the Research Ambassador program. Actually, Allison, can you tell us more who is eligible for the program? Is it for people with ALS, caregivers? Who can apply?
That's a great question. So mainly the program is for people living with ALS, whether it be as the person with ALS or the caregiving team of that person. But other people who have been impacted or affected or support the ALS community have gone through the program as well. So if it's a person living with ALS asking that question, I would suggest maybe you consider looking into it if it's interesting, because then you'll have all the resources to share with your circle of support, and they can share those even wider.
Yeah, there's a number of questions here about different topics. I'll take them one by one, but essentially they all relate to the next steps, basically. So first question is, if a drug works, for example, let's say that one of the drugs that we're testing is found to be positive, how soon will people living with ALS be able to access that medicine? That's a great question. So first of all, that definitely we hope that that's going to be the case. The next steps will be determined by the data or by the actual results. So in other words, if the drug is extremely positive and can go directly to submission to the FDA, that would be great. That would be obviously the fastest path. I do want to share that the process for submission of a drug to the FDA is by definition a process that takes some time, takes several months. And the reason for that is because the data that goes to the FDA to approve a new drug is not only the data from the trial. In fact, the data from the trial is only a small piece of the totality of the evidence. So what goes to the FDA is literally thousands and thousands of pages. There's some submissions that are 100,000 pages, and they include everything from toxicology experiments, label instructions, chemistry, manufacturing details, etc. And the clinical data, meaning the data from the trial, is only one of the, a small piece of this. So that's why it takes time for companies to submit data to the FDA. So I just want to say that again, that the timelines are not driven just by the trial. There's other things that need to happen in parallel. So it could still be several months, even with a very positive drug. In terms of will the data be shared in terms of, why a drug, for example, was stopped for futility or why a drug was positive? Absolutely. We're going to share all the data. We're already working on sort of how to structure that. And as you may know, there are several conferences in the fall, and I'm glad that many of them are also available for patients or open for patients for virtual participation. So for example, the ALS1 symposium, and then there's other conferences later on in the fall. And so again, all of this webinar, obviously will serve as a way to share more about the actual results, and then also those conferences, and many of them are accessible by patients, would be great opportunities to continue to stay up to date. I think that's also a big change. If I can comment about advocacy, the idea of these weekly webinars came from our patient advisors, and they really wanted to have weekly updates, and we felt, this is such a great idea. And I had to say, I was in clinic the other day and somebody said, well, I really love watching the webinars. I think they watch the recordings, And I said, well, I actually love being on the webinars because they give such a great opportunity to, first of all, I recognize familiar names, I get great questions, and it's really wonderful to be able to update the community in real time. Questions about other drugs, for example, now that the first 4 regimens are not enrolling anymore, how can people access those drugs? Well, obviously, depending on the results. If the results are positive for one of the regimens, hopefully there will be other, other opportunities. Another aspect of advocacy is that it also helped a lot with expanded access. So hopefully there will be opportunities if a drug is positive to use expanded access in a different way. Not just for people who are not eligible for trials, but also for sort of while we're waiting for approval of a drug. So we'll see. Again, it all depends on the results. Those were all the questions we got tonight. Actually, last question. Are we considering sharing placebo data with other trials if they use the same guidelines? That's actually an interesting thought. So not at this time, because for a number of reasons, but that's something that we could discuss. So the trial itself, the platform trial that we're discussing right now, was really designed, as we discussed in the past, as a registration trial. So what that means is that it has all the rigor and the robust processes to support the marketing of a new drug if the results are positive. And this is a side point, but it's actually a very important point, because when the FDA reviews data, you need to have collected it, cleaned it, managed, monitored in a certain way in order for the data to be valid, essentially. And so that basically implies a number of processes that are in place for the platform trial. Now, potentially, we could use we can share placebo data with external trials, but then we have to discuss what the goals of that would be. So, for example, if it's to explore new ideas, that's definitely a possibility. If it's to support a new drug, then we would have to discuss kind of the logistical aspects of that and the regulatory aspects. But that's actually a very good suggestion. And in fact, I know that we've been in discussion with some companies about how can we work together, how can we think about other ways to leverage the data. As you know, one of the big goals of the trial is not only to test the drugs, but also to generate biomarker data, et cetera, that can be shared. At least those can be shared, to learn more about ALS. Again, the idea of sharing placebo with external trials is an intriguing one, and I think something that we should explore. So thank you so much also for your comments and all the great questions and comments. So Allison, I'll give you the last word.
No, I just want to thank you, actually, Sabrina, and thank everybody that comes to these webinars. It's such a great opportunity to, again, close that gap between the patient community and the science community. And that's how we're going to find the answers. So thank you for participating.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.